Hello, this is Josh Green from Team Honeycomb. The purpose of this PowerPoint is to answer three questions that pertain to three web services that are introduced in Chapter 6 of the book Android in Action. The chapter's topic is on networking and web services. To give some background information on web services, um, a web service is basically a means of exposing an API over a technology-neutral network endpoint. In other words, they're a means to call a remote method or operation that's not tied to a specific platform or vendor and gets a result. Since we now have some type of idea of what a web service is, let me mention the three web services that we will be focusing on. These web services include POX, REST, and SOAP. Each of these web services provides a general guideline for accessing data and exposing operations, and each is more rigorous than the previous. So, without further ado, let's get started. Okay, let's get into our first topic of interest, which is POX, and it stands for Plain Old XML. POX is a web service that exposes chunks of XML over the wire, and it's usually over HTTP. It is used when calling a remote method or operation over HTTP, and the returning result are chunks of XML that can be parsed for data. An example in listing 6.10 from Android in Action shows how the POX approach is used to return recent posts from the Delicious API. The username and password are used to log in an HTTPS resource and returns posts and raw XML data. Okay, let's go into that listing. Okay, in this listing you see that it includes a Delicious URL and also provides a handler to update the user interface. And the reason why it's doing this is because since we want to call the Delicious service, we will use the handler to update the user interface. Okay, let's go to the next part of this listing. Okay, the next part of this listing is basically it passes credentials to perform a request, and these credentials include the username and password. So the username and password is being used as arguments in the method call for perform request. And in this perform request method, and then also via the helper right here, it basically logs into Delicious and returns an XML chunk representing the most recently bookmarked items. And then we see the method parse XML results right over here. And basically, this basically parses the XML chunk that we received into a string result. And then that will be displayed depending on, I guess, when you press the button, it will most likely display the output onto the screen. And that's basically a rundown on the POX web service. Okay, now that we kind of have gone over that, let's go on to our next topic, and that's REST. And of three, REST is basically right between those two in terms of, I guess, level. So let's go to that web service and talk about that. Okay, the REST web service stands for Representational State Transfer. It is popular in Android because it's simple and powerful, but let's go a little further into it. And basically, you can say that it's a more detailed web service in that it uses the concept of resources to define data and then manipulates them with different HTTP methods using a URL style approach. This approach is very similar to Android's intent system, so keep that in the back of your mind when taking this approach. People often associate Google GData APIs as being REST, but that's not completely true. They're REST-like, but not truly REST. There are two distinct tasks associated to REST and GData APIs. One is authenticating and retrieving a Google Client login token, and the other is retrieving the Google context data for a specified user. And if we're going to basically say like how is it used, that's basically really related to like the overall concept of this web service. And basically, to begin, you specify resources in a URI form, and you use different protocol methods to perform different actions. The Atom Publishing Protocol, or in other terms, Atom Pub, defines a REST-style protocol, and the GData APIs are an implementation of Atom Pub. As we discussed earlier, the entire intent approach of the Android platform is very similar to REST. For example, let's take a look at the URI content ://context/1. This URI is in the REST style. It includes a path that identifies the type of data and a particular resource. In this case, the resource will be contact1. Okay. However, however, one problem is that the URI doesn't say what does it do with this resource. But that's when REST comes into play. For HTTP purposes, REST uses various methods to perform different tasks. And these methods include post, get, put, and delete. And for a side note, true HTTP REST implementations use all the HTTP method types and resources to construct APIs. In the real world, you will more likely come into contact with REST-style APIs and REST implementations. To go further, REST-style APIs don't typically use the HTTP delete method and overload the get and post methods with different URLs for different tasks. And then for an example of the REST web service, there's a listing in Android Action, and that listing is 6.11. And this listing is called Using Google Context Atom Pub API Authentication, basically with authentication. And it's basically an example of using REST. And this example focuses on the network aspects of authentication with GData to obtain a client login token, and using that token with a subsequent REST-style request to obtain contact data by including an email address as a resource. Okay, let's go into that listing and see basically how it uses REST. Okay, and in this next listing, you see that we have a handler that handles the token request. Within this handler, you see that there's it sets a token value, and after these 2 points, then we have the contact handler, and this basically handles the contact request. And once we get past both of these two handlers, then we basically get to the get token method, and this method includes all the required parameters for obtaining a client login token from the data servers. And you can see that a little more clearly by going to the next listing, because then you kind of see the parameters that are required for the client login. And then basically after the setup, to obtain the token, we use a post request via the request helper over here, request helper right here, and how it's implemented basically. And then after the token details are taken care of, we have the get context method, and the get context method comes at this point. And basically this method uses the token obtained via the previous method as a header. And and one note, it's like once you have the token, you can cache it and use it with all subsequent requests, but you just don't need to obtain the token every time. We then encode the email address portion of the contacts API URL. And lastly, we make a GET request for data with the HTTP request helper. And basically, for a summary of this listing, we are basically making several network calls, or basically two or something. It's like the first network call is that we use HTTPS to get the token. The second network call is that we use HTTP to get the data. And basically these network calls are made using our previously defined helper class. And when the results are returned from the GData API, we parse XML block and update the user interface. And that's basically the listing, and we're going to basically just talk about the SOAP web service, as that is our last topic that we're really going to be talking about during this presentation. So let's go to the next one. Okay, now let's come to our last web service, and it's called SOAP, and it stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. And of the three web services, it's the most formal because it imposes strict rules about the types of data, transport mechanisms, and security. And then you just ask, how is it used? Well, it can be used in the Android platform, but it is normally not recommended. And one of the main reasons for this is because of Android's limited resources. So the main question now is really, should it be done rather than can it be done? So let's take this further and discuss the pros and cons of using SOAP. The things that make SOAP great are its support for strong types via the XML schema, its support for transactions, its security and encryption, its support for message orchestration and choreography, and all the related WS standards. The con is that there's a large overhead with the use of SOAP, which is problematic with Android's limited resources. And you say, and then to go on, typically developers who do choose to use SOAP don't use SOAP's advanced features. They use the envelope of the overhead in conjunction with a plain XML. If you aren't planning to use SOAP, REST and POX are simpler alternatives. Despite SOAP's intensive overhead, there are some situations where SOAP is used or recommended, such as pre-existing SOAP services or J2Me clients already existing with SOAP services. If you choose to use SOAP, you can use one of several ports of the KSOAP toolkit to embed in Java devices. And if you want more information on this toolkit, check out this website. And now let's go into two examples. So that's what we'll be working on now. Okay, let's get into these two examples of the SOAP web service. And the focus of this example in particular is reading SOAP services. And this example does basically three things. The first thing it does is it makes a call to a SOAP web service. Two, it reads and parses the output. And three, it displays the web server message and activity. And I'm not going to go too far. I'm not going to go too in depth here. But if you want to go a little more in depth and then try this example out yourself, I would suggest going to this go to this URL at the bottom of the screen. Okay, and since we kind of did like a brief overview of this example, let's go to the next example. Okay, in this next example, we're basically using KSOAP 2 for Android and parsing out data. We kind of talked about the KSOAP 2 like toolkit like beforehand, but this is an actual example of it. And in this example, we're basically preparing a SOAP message and getting a SOAP object as a response. And the same thing, I'm not going to go too in depth here, but if you want to try this example yourself, see how it works, and etc., then I would suggest going to this URL, and you should be able to find it very helpful. Okay, and if you want more detailed information on SOAP, on a SOAP web service and how to use it, more information can be found in the following links. And I would say those I looked at them myself and they were very helpful. And so in this kind of like team teaching kind of presentation, we have gone over three web services: POX, which stands for Plain Old XML; REST, which stands for Representational State Transfer; and SOAP, which stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. Well, I hope this kind of presentation was kind of helpful. I didn't get too in-depth in specific examples. I kind of did it in such a way that you kind of knew what was kind of going on. Well, hope this helps, and see ya.